I'm Regina Troxel, and it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Dwight Tillery grew up in Cincinnati, where he was educated in his public schools and graduated from the University of Cincinnati with a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science. He received his Juris Doctor of Laws from the University of Michigan Law School. Dwight has held a number of distinguished professional positions throughout his career. Mr. Tillery is a licensed attorney in the state of Ohio and is also licensed to practice before the Federal District Court, the Sixth Circuit Appellate Court, and the United States Supreme Court. Dwight has been an attorney for over 30 years. In 1991, Mr. Tillery stunned the city of Cincinnati by becoming the first African American popularly elected mayor of Cincinnati. As mayor, he created the Mayor's Commission on Children, Reshaping Youth Priorities, an anti-violence organization targeting youth, spoke frequently at public schools, played a key role in establishing venture capital for African American businesses. This fund allowed the start of Blue Chip Broadcasting Company, and assisted in establishing a mentoring program for minority businesses. As a member of City Council, he sponsored many pieces of legislation that benefited the poor and minorities. He authored legislation that created a surrogate parenting program entitled It Takes a Village. As mayor, Mr. Tillery founded the Grassroots Leadership Academy, which trained hundreds of low to moderate income citizens on how to be leaders in their communities. Mr. Tillery was deeply disturbed that Avondale did not have a neighborhood grocery store and persuaded City Council to provide the resources to a group of Avondale ministers interested in revitalizing the Avondale Town Center. Mr. Tillery is a recipient of many awards and honors, including an honorary doctorate from the Cincinnati State Technical College, the Leadership Excellence Award from the Office of the Governor of Ohio, the Award of Excellence from the University of Cincinnati, Ohio's Civil Rights Dream Award, Outstanding Commitment to Public Service Award from the Citizens Committee on Youth, the Health Hero Award from the Ohio Commission on Minority Health, Dr. King's Keep the Dream Alive Award, and the Gertrude E. Rush Award from the National Bar Association. Wow, you're pretty busy. Very impressive. Yeah. Additionally, Mr. Tillery served on many boards and commissions. Currently, Mr. Tillery is founder and president and CEO of the Center for Closing the Health Gap in Greater Cincinnati, whose mission is to lead the efforts in eliminating racial and ethnic disparities in Greater Cincinnati through advocacy, education, and community outreach. He has dedicated his life to community service. Please join me in welcoming Dwight Tillery.
Well, it's close to the afternoon. I don't want to become a slave of the mic, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me. But I want to thank Regina for the introduction and her interest in having me speak to you on such an important day. I also want to thank the students for their great singing and their skit, thank you, and their dreams, and how you helped each other just as you just helped me. So I want to give you a big round of applause. That is great that we're willing to help one another. But before I begin my speech, and I won't keep you long, it may seem long. They accuse me of being a Baptist minister, but I promise you I will not be one in terms of the time. I will stay on point. But I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the President and CEO of Christ, Susan Crawshaw, who has been such a great leader, a friend, and someone who has reached out to the center as we have reached out to Christ to partner And we're delighted that we have a great partnership with Christ to address the health inequities that exist among so many minorities in our community. I have enjoyed her, and I told her what I admired about her the most. She surely dresses sharp. She's a great person, and I can't say enough about this new partnership. I can see the sincerity, if you don't mind me saying Susan. I can see her sincerity in wanting to really make this hospital be a hospital for all the people, and particularly the people who live in this neighborhood. Well, let me start off with my talk. The title is Dr. King, just as relevant today as yesterday. Just as relevant today as yesterday. During the summer of 1968, it's going to be real tough for some of these young people to think about that. But I was completing my sophomore year at the University of Cincinnati. And on April the 5th of that year, I arrived that morning at my literature class, only to find my professor who was ranting and raving about the death of Dr. King. But for some reason or another, I had not received the news of his death the day before. And needless to say, I was stunned and confused. The mood of the class was somber. Among other things, my professor said that he thought he'd just leave this country. He was so frustrated and disgusted by what had happened. And shortly thereafter, he dismissed the class. As I started out of the classroom, he stopped me and he apologized for what had happened. I was the only African American student in the class, and I will never forget how upset he was about the murder of Dr. King. The mood on the campus that day had an air of uncertainty and even despair. And there were various gatherings around the campus where students, faculty, and administrators met to try to understand what had happened in this nation. Within the next few days, I, along with a university official, was asked to represent the University of Cincinnati at the funeral of Dr. King. I had been the first vice president of the Black Student Union. And I see one of my colleagues, later I became the president, and my vice president is Robert Merriweather. I had to ask Robert to stand up so we can give him a big round of applause. We go a long way back, and there was a great deal of struggle on that campus, but I think we did a lot to bring the attention of the inequities that African Americans experienced at the University of Cincinnati and began a plan of change. But at any rate, in preparing for my first plane ride and the purpose of the trip, I felt sadness and anxiety. Upon arriving in Atlanta, the experience of that world event flooded me with many emotions. I grappled with my soul, trying to make sense out of a senseless killing. And the fact that there were some in America who didn't like me just because of the color of my skin. Like many people in the world, it wasn't until much later in life that I understood the personal sacrifice that Dr. King made in order to make our society better. You see, Dr. King was a man of many talents. He was preacher, civil rights leader, humanitarian, author, father, husband, and a black man who had hopes and dreams for himself, for his family, for this nation, and for this world. Dr. King was truly an extraordinary man, not because of any title or position he held, nor because of the people he knew or where he lived, or even his great oratorical skills, but because he had an unrelenting conscience that would not allow him to look away from the wrongdoings of our society, no matter who were committing them. Each year, programs like these take place all over America. We celebrate the birth of Dr. King as it is recognized as a national holiday. Without a doubt, this holiday is something unusual because there are few persons who have a national holiday named in their honor. But King was an unusual person. What was it that made this man's life so special, so different, that this country would name a national holiday in his honor? Was it because of how he died or what he died for? Dr. King wasn't liked by many people in this country during the Civil Rights Movement. Many of the newspapers, including the Cincinnati Enquirer, throughout this land called him a troublemaker, a communist, a socialist. Dr. King was criticized daily and ridiculed by many in this country, from powerful politicians all the way to the members of the Ku Klux Klan. His life was under constant threat, and he experienced ugly treatment, including violence and even an explosion at his home. Many of his followers were beaten by local police, spat upon by unruly crowds, and yet some were even murdered. But notwithstanding the terrible acts of violence and hate and even deaths, Dr. King continued to confront the evils of that time, racial bigotry, with nonviolence. Dr. King confronted the morality of this nation for how it treated certain members of its society. People who had been slaves in this nation and later became second-class citizens. People who were treated less than human simply because of the color of their skin. And while I'm not going to go into the details of the inhumane treatment blacks experience in this nation, suffice it to say that the enslavement of any people and the discriminatory treatment after their emancipation was an abomination to humanity. But what I want to focus on with you this afternoon is why Dr. King took on the fight against racism. Yes, there were many whites who also stood with King, just as the abolitionists stood against slavery. They too were spat upon, beaten, and even lost their lives as well. People, white and black, who stood up against the mistreatment of blacks in our society. But what made King and others have the courage, determination, optimism, and faith that their nonviolent efforts would change race relations in this nation? Why is Dr. King just as relevant today as yesterday? Because he stood against injustice and evil in our society, no matter whom the perpetrators were. The question I raise for you today is, why do most of us witness injustice, unfairness, and evil and simply look the other way? Why is it that far too many of us are willing to see others mistreated no matter what the circumstances might be and simply walk away? There are countless stories of people being treated unjustly, and we seem not to care. Every day, many of us, some of you right here in this auditorium, witness injustice, cruelty, and inequities, and you go on with your lives as business as usual. We say nothing, and we do nothing. We say nothing, and we do nothing. My thoughts about Dr. King about his life goes far beyond the issues of that time. the fact that he led countless marches for equality, or the fact that he was spat upon, or called racial slurs and ultimately murdered, was a price that he was willing to pay in order to change this society for the better. Dr. King, just as relevant today as yesterday. Dr. King once said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." Too many of us are willing to sacrifice our principles of integrity, our morals, our sense of justice and fair play for comfort and convenience. We ought to be outraged that in this country, this great nation of ours, that we have 47 million people without health insurance. We ought to be outraged that there are 3.5 million people who will experience homelessness in a given year. Children, these children, many other children under the age of 18 account for 39% of the homeless population, and 42% of these are under the age of 5. This is America I'm talking about. The number of unemployed persons as of December 5th, 2008 was 10.3 million. And recently, the average unemployment rate has reached over 7%. Over 13 American children live in families with incomes below the federal poverty level, which is $21,200 a year for a family of 4. Think about that. A report finds that almost half of all public high school students in America's 50 largest cities fail to graduate. I'm talking about America, people. There are 36.2 million adults and children who struggled with hunger last year. 12.2% of Americans who didn't have the money or assistance to get enough food to maintain an active, healthy life. And the incarceration rate in America is the highest in the world. My friends, we have become a nation of haves and have-nots. Haves and have-nots. We have a situation where 2 to 3% of the population of this country controls the majority of the wealth in this nation. I ask you, what's wrong with this picture? We can bail out Wall Street, but we can't fix Main Street. We can bail out the banks, but the banks can't bail us out. Tell me what's wrong with this picture. Tell me what's wrong with this picture. This is America. You know, the great philosopher Edmund Burke once said that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Are you doing nothing? Are you doing nothing? Well, you know, it's my belief that King stood for far more than the civil rights movement. It was his conscience that caused him to get involved in the civil rights movement, the Poor People's March, the sanitation workers' strike in Memphis, Tennessee, where he lost his life, and against the Vietnam War. Dr. King was a Baptist preacher, trained in the Judeo-Christian principles. He believed in treating others as he would want others to treat him. He didn't take on the cause. He didn't take on the cause of racism just because he was black. He took it on because of its immorality. That's why he took that cause on. And as we begin to look at the issues facing this world, we must face the fact that we're in this world together. Whether it's global warming or selling cigarettes to third world countries, we're all impacted by what we do to each other or what we fail to do for one another. It may be hard to believe, but yes, I do remember back in August of 1963. I know I look too young to be around during that time. But I remember that great speech that Dr. King gave. That we should judge a man by the content of his character and not by the color of his skin. And that is just as relevant as how we do business with each other, how we educate our children, and how we provide health care to the people of this nation. It is our character that matters, not who we know, not how much money we have, not where we live, or the color of our skin. It is having the courage and decency to do the right thing. The courage and decency to do the right thing. And coming to my conclusion, Dr. King said that the time is always right to do what is right. The time is right to always do what is right. Dr. King's mission was to stir the conscience of America, to cause all of us to look inside ourselves and see the good, and then allow that good to guide our lives. Dr. King, just as relevant today as yesterday. I thank you.